Hello. Let's take a look at exercise 18.27. That's chapter 18, question 27, uh, part C. But first, let's refresh our memory on the question here. It says reading scores in Atlanta. The Trial Urban District Assessment, TUDA, is a government sponsored study of student achievement in large urban school districts. TUDA gives a reading test scored from 0 to 500. A score of 243 is a basic reading level. For part C, that's an important number there. The score 243 is the basic reading level, and a score of 281 is proficient. Scores for a random sample of 3,000 eighth graders in Atlanta had X bar 250 with a standard error 1.0. Okay, let's just quickly review parts A and B before we move on to C. So part A, um, we don't have 3,000 scores, but we know that T procedures is safe, and that's because our sample mean is more than 40. Part B gives a 99% confidence interval. We did that one in class. Here's the answer to it. The formula, X bar plus or minus T star times standard error. And in this question, they just give us a standard error. They do the math for us. S over square root of n equals 1.0. I used 2.576 for T star. I just used infinite degrees of freedom. In the textbook, they use 1,000 degrees of freedom. But at any rate, I'll just stick with a 2.576. So there's our margin of error. Or excuse me, there's our confidence interval. And then you could round that off to a 3 there, 250 plus or minus 3. And so we're 99% sure that the population mean of potentially millions of Atlanta school children who would take this test is between 247 and 253. At least we're 99% sure the real population mean is somewhere in this number. Okay, now having figured that, let's move on to part C, which is right here. Let's read the question. It says, urban children often perform below the basic level. Is there good evidence that the mean for all Atlanta 8th graders is less than the basic level? All right, so remember the basic level is 243. So in other words, it's a hypothesis test question because it's asking a yes or no question. Is there good evidence? And so the null here is mu equals 243. That would be that the school children perform at the basic level. And the question is, back to the question here, it says, is there good evidence that the mean for all Atlanta 8th graders is less than the basic level? Okay, so we're asking the question, is there evidence that mu is less than 243? Okay, well, the answer is no. Without doing a hypothesis test, we know the answer is no. There's no evidence. And the reason, our X bar already is higher than 243. When you give yourself a margin of error of rounded up to 3, we're 99% sure that the real population mean is between 247 and 253. And the 243, that's way below. In fact, that's several standard errors below the but excuse me, the X bar 250, and then the boundaries of the confidence interval are higher than several standard errors, excuse me, higher than the 243. So there's no evidence that the mean reading scores are below 243. So we can see that already. But if you did do a hypothesis test, this is an interesting one because the alternate here is sort of backwards of what we usually are doing. We're asking the question, is the reading scores lower than 243? And our sample result is actually higher than 243 already. Now, if X bar had been lower than 243, like 240 or 230, then there'd be some evidence. Then we'd have to pay more careful attention to the hypothesis test. But anyway, if you did want to work this out, step 2 would be, so step 1 is the hypothesis. Step 2 is get your data. So X bar equals 250. Standard deviation we don't know, but we do know that S over square root of n equals 1.0. They just give that to us in the problem. right here it says the standard error is 1.0. And occasionally in literature you'll see this. The researcher doesn't give the standard deviation of the sample. Instead, they just give it the standard error. They which means they just did that s over square root of n for you. Degrees of freedom. Well, we have 3,000 in our sample, so 2,999. N equals 3,000. Okay, there's our basic data. Now for the computations, this is step 3. So the standard error, s over square root of n, they did it for us. It's 1.0. So the t-score is x bar minus mu from the null hypothesis divided by that standard error, s over square root of n. So that is x bar is 250 minus the null 243. 250 minus 243 divided by the standard error 1.0, which equals positive 7. Okay, now here's where it gets a little bit unusual compared to other problems we've done. Usually when you get a t-score that high, you say, oh, reject the null. There's no way that that our sample could really have happened if the null was true. But take a look here. Our t is positive because our sample mean was higher than the null, 250 versus 243. But the alternate is asking if there's evidence that the mean is less than 243. Okay, well, clearly it's not less. Our sample is nowhere near being less than 243. And even with, like I mentioned, the margin of error, plus or minus a certain margin of error, we're nowhere near below 243 there. So the answer has to be accept the null or fail to reject the null. All right, let's take a look at our t-distribution. Let's see what's going on here. So 7 is way up here. So it's like way up there. It's not even on the table. It's such a big number. Now, usually we're interested in the little area of the tail, but in this case, since the alternate is less, mu is less than, we want to know the area below 7. So in other words, we're looking for all this right there. Okay, so that p-value is 100%. I mean, it's probably 0.999999, but we'll just say 100%. So p-value equals 1, or 100%, whatever you prefer. And so clearly that's way above any alpha that you set there. P-value is above alpha. Whatever alpha we set, we didn't set an alpha, but no matter what it is, it's going to be higher than that. So that means fail to reject the null, or accept the null, depending on what phrasing you want to use there. Okay, and so the final conclusion is there is not evidence that the mean score of the population is lower. I'll just say the mean score to keep it simple. The mean score is below basic level of 243. And that's it.